She said it across the kitchen table, loud enough for my aunt to hear, sharp enough to make the room go quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and kept washing the dishes like nothing had happened. They thought I was embarrassed. They thought I'd finally been put in my place. What they never understood was that I'd already been paying more than bills: rent with obedience, interest with silence, late fees with my dignity. I worked 2 jobs they dismissed as temporary. I saved carefully while being reminded daily that I owed them everything. That night, as my mother listed all the ways I was a burden, something settled in me. Not anger. Clarity. I followed her rule exactly. Every word, every condition, completely legal, completely quiet. And when the numbers finally spoke for me, no one at that table was laughing anymore, especially my mother. The house always smelled like overcooked food and old arguments. Even on quiet days, there was tension sitting in the corners, like dust no one bothered to clean. I was 31 and still living under my mother's roof, a fact she never let me forget. To her, it didn't matter that I worked full-time or that I paid for my own groceries. What mattered was that the house was hers, and so, apparently, was my dignity. My mother liked an audience. She saved her sharpest comments for when relatives visited or neighbors dropped by. That afternoon, my aunt was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, watching me sort mail. A utility bill had arrived with my name on it, forwarded from my old apartment after I'd been forced to move back home when my last job downsized. That's when my mother snapped. "If you're so smart," she yelled, slamming her palm against the counter, "then pay your own bills." The room went silent. My aunt avoided my eyes. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. I said nothing. I folded the bill, placed it back in the envelope, and continued sorting the mail. My mother scoffed, mistaking my silence for surrender. She had always done that, confused restraint with weakness. Growing up, I was the capable one. The child who didn't need help. The one who could manage. My younger brother got sympathy, support, and second chances. I got expectations. If I struggled, it was framed as failure. If I succeeded, it was luck. Somewhere along the way, my role became clear. I was useful when I gave, inconvenient when I asked. After my father passed away, things got worse. Bills piled up. Responsibilities shifted. My mother leaned on me for errands, paperwork, phone calls she didn't want to make. Yet every time money came up, she reminded me I was just staying temporarily. Temporary stretched into years, and her resentment grew sharper with time. My daily life became predictable. Wake early, commute to work, smile through meetings, come home to a house where my presence felt conditional. I paid for my phone, my car, my insurance. I contributed quietly, without acknowledgement. And still, she spoke to me like I was freeloading. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat on the edge of my mattress and stared at the ceiling. My mother's words replayed in my head, not as an insult, but as a challenge. Pay your own bills. The phrase echoed differently in the quiet. I thought about every dollar I'd earned. Every expense I'd covered without help. Every time I'd stepped in when she needed something done properly, efficiently, legally. I thought about what I actually owed and what I didn't. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I gathered my documents, my statements, my records. I didn't announce anything. I didn't argue back. I moved through the house calmly, making coffee, feeding the cat, listening as my mother hummed to herself, unaware. But as I slipped my folder into my bag and closed the door behind me, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. Preparation changed the rhythm of my days. On the surface, nothing looked different. I still left for work at the same time, still came home to the same house, still answered my mother's questions with polite, neutral words. But internally, everything was quieter. Focused, I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending decisions she had already made up her mind about. At work, I became meticulous. I volunteered for projects others avoided, the ones that required patience and attention to detail. Numbers had always made sense to me, clear, honest, unforgiving in a way people weren't. I stayed late, not to impress anyone, but to learn. Processes, rules, boundaries. The invisible lines that kept everything running legally and cleanly. My mother noticed the distance before she noticed the change. She complained that I was cold. That I no longer shared things with her. I nodded and apologized without meaning it. The truth was, I had learned that information was a currency, and I had been giving it away for free my entire life. At home, the expectations didn't lessen. If anything, they grew. She asked me to cover small expenses. Just this once. She handed me envelopes and receipts, assuming I'd sort them out like always. I did, carefully. I made copies. I logged dates. I asked clarifying questions in writing instead of verbally. She rolled her eyes, irritated by my sudden formality. "You're acting like this is a business," she muttered one evening. I almost smiled. My brother visited more often during that time. He lounged on the couch, joked with our mother, ate meals I helped prepare. He never noticed the tension because it didn't touch him. When money came up, he disappeared into his phone. When chores were discussed, my name floated naturally into the conversation, as if by habit. Late at night, I reviewed documents on my laptop, statements, emails, policies. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not exactly. I was looking for accuracy, for truth, for the difference between what I was told I owed and what I actually did. What surprised me most wasn't what I found. It was how long I had accepted assumptions as facts. How easily I'd allowed guilt to replace clarity. The more I understood, the steadier I felt. Less like a daughter trying to prove her worth, more like an adult finally standing on solid ground. My mother continued her comments, sharp and casual. "Must be nice to live here without responsibility. Some people your age have real lives." I let them pass through me without reaction. Silence unsettled her more than any argument ever had. One afternoon, I came home to find a stack of bills on the kitchen counter. My name written across a sticky note in her handwriting. "We need to talk about this," it read. I picked them up slowly, flipping through each one. Familiar amounts. Familiar patterns. And one small detail that didn't belong. I placed the stack back down exactly where I'd found it, and went to my room, closing the door softly behind me. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time, I knew something she didn't. And I knew that when we finally talked, the conversation wouldn't go the way she expected. The conversation happened 2 days later, on a Sunday afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet. My brother had already left. The television was off. My mother sat at the kitchen table with her arms crossed. The stack of bills spread out neatly in front of her like evidence. She didn't ask me to sit. She never did. "We need to straighten this out," she said, tapping the top envelope. "You can't keep pretending you're independent when you're still relying on me." I pulled out a chair and sat anyway. Calmly, I'd rehearsed nothing, because I didn't need to. Facts didn't require rehearsal. "I agree," I said. "We should straighten it out." That caught her off guard, just slightly. Her eyebrows lifted, then tightened again. She started listing expenses, utilities, property tax, maintenance. Costs that had nothing to do with me, but were presented as if my existence alone had caused them. I listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, letting her finish. When she finally paused, waiting for me to argue or apologize, I reached into my bag. I placed my folder on the table and opened it. Inside were copies, clean, organized, dated, my contributions. Transfers, receipts, written requests she'd made, messages where she'd said, "Don't worry about it, we'll handle that," followed weeks later by accusations that I hadn't done enough. I slid one page forward, then another, keeping my movements slow. "I just want everything to be accurate," I said evenly. "You told me to pay my own bills. So I reviewed what's actually mine." Her mouth opened, then closed. She picked up one sheet, scanning it quickly, then another more slowly. Her confidence began to drain, replaced by irritation. "You're being dramatic," she said. "Families don't keep records like this." "I do," I replied. "Because I was told to." She pushed the papers away. This isn't necessary. It is to me. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was simply refusing to accept confusion as truth anymore. She tried a different approach. Sighing, shaking her head, talking about everything she'd sacrificed, about how hard it was after my father died, about how ungrateful I was being. Normally, that would have worked. Normally, guilt would have pulled me back into my place. But something had shifted. I'm not questioning what you've been through, I said quietly. I'm just clarifying my responsibilities. Her eyes narrowed. So what are you saying? I looked down at the papers once more, then back at her. I'm saying I'll pay what's legally mine, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. The word legally landed between us like a dropped plate. She leaned back in her chair, studying me, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as her daughter. Not as the reliable one. But as someone she couldn't control with tone alone anymore. That night, she barely spoke to me. Doors closed harder than usual. Dishes were washed aggressively. I lay in bed listening to the house settle, feeling neither victorious nor afraid, just resolved. Because now she knew I was paying attention. And soon, she would realize that attention changes everything. The change didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, the way truth often does when it's no longer being ignored. My mother stopped leaving piles of bills on the counter. She stopped making jokes about my free ride in front of relatives. When money came up, she chose her words carefully, as if each one needed to be tested before it left her mouth. I noticed something else too. Requests became questions. Assumptions became pauses. I paid exactly what I had said I would. On time, documented, nothing more, nothing less. And for the first time, my finances began to breathe. The anxiety I'd been carrying for years slowly loosened its grip. I slept better. I walked into the house without bracing myself. But distance has a way of unsettling people who are used to control. One evening, my mother knocked on my door. She stood there longer than necessary, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I followed her to the kitchen. She gestured for me to sit this time. She spoke carefully, circling the subject instead of naming it. About stress. About misunderstandings. About how families shouldn't feel divided. She didn't apologize. She didn't have to. The shift was apology enough. "I didn't realize how much you were handling," she admitted finally, eyes fixed on the table. "I know," I said. That was all. Weeks later, I moved out. Not dramatically. Not with slammed doors or tearful goodbyes. Just boxes, a rented truck, and a set of keys placed gently on the counter. My mother watched from the doorway silent. As I drove away, I felt no rush of triumph, only relief. Because the revenge wasn't humiliation or confrontation. It wasn't shouting or proving anyone wrong in public. It was something far quieter. I had followed her command exactly. I paid my own bills, and in doing so, I took back something far more valuable than money, my autonomy,